Hello there, my name is Tuomas, and in this video I'm gonna talk about my favorite Beach Boys related books. I don't have all of them, obviously. The Beach Boys have been written about so many times throughout the decades. I haven't read all of them. Even here I have a few books that I haven't yet read. But let's start off with this one. Actually, the idea for this video came from this book, because this is a book by Peter Ames Carlin, released in 2006, I believe. I bought this about 10 years ago while I was getting hardcore into the Beach Boys, and around the same time period I bought multiple different books, at least like half of these books, by the way. And I read this maybe 1/3 through. Probably the major reason for that was because I had read the same story and heard the same story around that same time period so many times that I just got overwhelmed. And I kind of forgot this, and in 2023, I'm sweating, by the way, not because it's so hot in here, but because I was just on a little walk with my dog and I started to film this right after it, so excuse me if I'm sweating, that's because of why. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. I had read the same story, the story of Brian and the Beach Boys, so many times that year or so that it was just a bit too much. And in 2023 I started a project to finish all my unfinished books that I've started but never got to finish, and this was one of them. And I recently just finished it. Believe what people say, this is considered pretty much always as one of the best books written about the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. It mostly concentrates on Brian Wilson's story, but it does have the most important aspects of the other members as well, and their contributions and stuff, a little bit about their personal lives, but it mostly tells the story of Brian Wilson. I have some criticism for this book as well. It's not just all praise. I think the book is the best when it describes the most influential and important era of the group musically, meaning the mid-60s. It goes into high detail in that section, and I believe we are like pretty much at like the halfway of the book when we finish the 60s. Yeah, I think so. And even that tells you something. So it means like the first half about is pretty much like the 60s stuff, and after that you got crammed into the rest of the book, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. And it's a decision. It has been an artistic decision to concentrate on the most important section of the group's music. But sometimes I think everybody takes that path when they tell the story of the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, and they sort of gloss over the 70s and especially 80s and the later years. And at this point, having read and seen so many documentaries that follow that same path and books that follow that same path, I'm getting tired of it. I would like to know more about the 70s stuff and 80s stuff, and 70s is still fairly accurately covered over here, but when we get to the 80s, it's just fast forwarding over stuff. And also I had a little issue with the way Peter over here starts to, when we get to the 70s stuff, the 15 big ones. Well, he has a lot of praise for Love You, but 15 big ones, MIU, even Keeping the Summer Alive and some stuff, here and there. He goes into very great detail in just telling me as a reader that this song and this album sucks. He doesn't use these words, I'm just paraphrasing over here. He's very articulate and stuff, but I just don't want to, I get it, it's fair to say that, and that's the author's opinion, but when I'm reading a biography, I much more prefer a sort of objective look on the work itself, because the reader can then go and listen to the albums themselves and decide what they think. So I just sort of got tired at some point about reading how this song is just boring and useless, and because I personally really love a lot of those songs. So to me, it just was kind of come on, this song, this story once again. But whatever, a lot of people don't like the late 70s stuff. But to me, that was just a bit tiresome to read that same mantra again that you hear in so many so many stories and books and whatever, but that was just a minor thing. Anyway, it's a great book if you want to learn about the early days of the Beach Boys, the origins, and their most influential and important era. This is the book that you might want to get, and it's a great book to give to somebody who doesn't really know that much about the Beach Boys. And you cannot say that of a lot of these books that I have over here that I might even like more than this one personally, as more sort of, I don't know, fun to read sort of books, but they are not so factual. So, this might be the book that you want to give to somebody if they want to learn about the Beach Boys. But let's move on, because I have so many books over here. Wouldn't it be nice? This is the second cover. Originally, I think it came with a different cover with the dark looking Brian looking at the camera, and then there's like a beach or something behind him. But this is the infamous book by Todd Eugene Landy Gold. Okay, whatever. Like this is the first autobiography by Brian Wilson. It was a very interesting read. I read this a few years back after having read so many and knowing about all the lawsuits. I mean, Audrey, Brian's mom, Carl, Mike, probably. Pretty much everybody sued Brian after the release of this book, because this book describes these persons, like basically all the persons in Brian's life, except Brian himself, as just with these horrendous adjectives. It's kind of mesmerizing read. But anyhow, after having read so many negative reviews and words of this book, I found myself highly liking it. And one of the most fascinating things about this book is that you find over here in the middle section images that you have not and will not see anywhere else. There's a few pictures of the 70s Brian I haven't seen probably anywhere else. One with his family, and then these were pretty fascinating. We got some Landy stuff. There's basically a picture with Landy sort of bear hugging Brian, which is pretty much a scene from Love and Mercy. It's kind of interesting. The infamous hamburger scene. But these pictures I found super cool. You see Brian with his heaviest doing push-ups, and then Brian having lost weight and walking in New York City looking super cool. And here he is having a walk in Northern California. Like, these pictures I haven't seen anywhere else. And there was some other stuff as well. And overall, super interesting read, but this is not the book that you want to read as your first introduction to the Beach Boys, because the voice of Brian, it's written as in Brian writing it, in his own voice and telling his story, but the voice of Brian over here is not the voice of Brian. In parts it is. You when you have read enough about him and seen enough his interviews, and you seen how he talks, and you know the story, you are able to notice here sections that actually are him and are very cool. Anecdotes and stuff, little stories. But then there are some weird things where Landy came in and messed with the, like, sometimes the voice of Brian over here just goes so spiteful, hateful. It's just these weird, I don't know, like these weird things that just, it's not at all how Brian talks. And anyway, to be honest, I found the Landy stuff, the 80s stuff, super interesting over here, because it's not it does seem like Landy really went in and added a lot of things about himself, and try to make himself sound more cooler than what he actually was. But there are some parts where Landy must have missed some things, because some sections do paint Landy as the kind of crazy guy that he actually was. So it's very interesting if you want to know more about his methods and that a lot of that sort of weird dark stuff, and especially the Hawaii, the first Hawaii thing, that when he abducted Brian, kidnapped him to Hawaii in '82. That whole section I found super fascinating, with Brian climbing a mountain, and the stories of him being shocked that now his breakfast is going to be just a like a fruit juice or something. Like, yeah, anyway, like all those things I found pretty interesting, because you don't hear about those things in any other books really in that detail. But not the kind of book that you want to read as your first one, but after all those negative words that you find about this one, it's really not that bad. It's quite interesting. But let's move forward. This one is a little bit different because it's not a biography. It's a telling of the Beach Boys concert history, starting from the very first concerts and going through all the decades, all the way through up until 2012. So it has also the 50th anniversary tour included, which I love, because this might be my favorite book, not my favorite biography, because this is not a biography, but overall, just if you want to know about the Beach Boys throughout the decades, this is most likely the best book. Not just because, well, it does have anecdotes about the album stuff as well, but it does concentrate on the live performances. But what I find super interesting about this book are all the photographs, because it is filled with great photos that you don't see anywhere else, and a lot of cool pictures from the early days. I'll show you something super rare stuff. Cool images, and images of concert tickets, and you got just so much stuff over here. And yeah, if you just want to know the story, the story and the different eras that the group went through, and all the way throughout 90s, and you got some stuff about Brian's solo career as well. It's a very well documented and factual based book. There's a whole chapter at the end about 2012 reunion. And yeah, anyway, this is by John Stebbins, and he actually, you can see John Stebbins, I'm not sure how you should pronounce his first name, but he's here with the Beach Boys. And Ian Rustin. So, anyway, the guys did a phenomenal job on this one, and probably my favorite Beach Boys related book, excluding the biographies, obviously. But it's a thick book, a lot of stuff to read over here, a lot of pictures, which I love. I Am Brian Wilson by Brian Wilson and Ben Greenman. This is a fairly new book, released in 2016, with this around the same time period that Mike Love's biography, actually, or autobiography, was released, which was weird. This was a mixed bag for a lot of people. Personally, I really loved this one. The main criticism seemed to be for this book that it's too meandering and it goes all over the place. For example, it starts off from 2004 Royal Festival Hall, from the Smile, Brian Wilson Presents Smile show. But personally, I loved that part of it. This is not the kind of book that you can use as an sort of factual thing, like Catch a Wave. You got a great index over there and a lot of stuff, bibliography, discography, you got so much stuff over there at the back. You can easily find tidbits and stuff. This is just not that sort of book. This is a great read, not to learn about the Beach Boys, not to learn about dates and stuff like that. But if you want to hear, because while you read this, you truly hear Brian's voice. If you just want to, and I think I read this from 1 or 2 sittings. This was such a great read for me. If you just want to hear his voice and him telling his stories, and there's a lot of funny stories, there's a lot of sad stories, and he's brutally honest over here. This book is not the sort of book where Brian is describing himself as a hero or whatever. He is brutally honest over here, and he doesn't always come off as the greatest guy of all, when you read this thing. But anyway, it's filled with great Brianisms. Just funny stories after funny stories, and I love the way it includes a lot of song lyrics. Like so, you got song lyrics here and there, and they sort of go along with the story. The voice truly is Brian's voice. I believe this thing was put together in a way that Brian was interviewed, and the interviews were recorded, probably for many hours and throughout many years probably, and then an author was picked to put that all together. I believe that was the way this was done. So, Brian didn't actually write anything. That's just not the way these things are made. It's a sad read, funny read, heartbreaking sometimes. But I especially loved all the parts where Brian describes his life in the 2000s and also late 90s, with Melinda and their kids. And all that stuff I found super fascinating, because that's the stuff that you don't usually get to read anywhere. A lot of these books were written in the 70s or 80s or 90s or early 2000s. So, they just don't go into detail because that stuff hadn't really even happened yet. So, I highly recommend this, even for somebody that doesn't really know about the Beach Boys, but just wants to get a glimpse of that world. Brian's voice and the way his brains work is very well documented over here. Then we have another one by John Stebbins, and this is The Real Beach Boy, Dennis Wilson's biography, probably the most famous one of them, and there hasn't been that many books written about Dennis, but this is pretty famous one. And there was also a BBC documentary made around the same time that this came out, I believe, with the name of The Real Beach Boy, maybe. Anyway, about Dennis, which is a great documentary. Little documentary, but, anyway. This book is probably my favorite Beach Boys related book. I've read this once or twice, and a lot of times I like to just go back and look at the images, because this one has a lot of cool photographs, and a lot of the chapters are just great to go back to and read here and there, just little snippets. And it's a heartbreaking story, as we all know. Brutally honest, and great interviews by the of people that knew. I almost said Brian. Dennis. Obviously, it is a tragedy, so it's a sad read, and it's a very different story compared to Brian's story, which is ultimately is a story about redemption, and has a sort of happy ending anyway. This one doesn't have that one, but cool images, by the way. Anyway, just filled with great photos, anecdotes, and if you want to know Dennis more, get this book, find it somewhere, because when it comes to the Beach Boys books, Dennis is always just a side character over there, but over here he is the main guy, and yeah, you get to know so much of him from this book. Read this, it's a great read, probably my favorite Beach Boys related book. And this one was also great. This is by the same author, The Lost Beach Boy, about David Marks, and You might think, if you haven't read this and you don't know much about David Marks, you might think, well, I don't really need to get that one. I don't care. David Marks wasn't really a member anyway. I don't care. His contributions were minimal. But you are so wrong. This is a book you need to read. You have no idea how much you're gonna learn new stuff about the early days of the Beach Boys, the contributions by David, and how much you're gonna enjoy reading about his later life, because his life story is as crazy as anything. It's super interesting to read. This is partly funny, partly sad, and also Dennis Wilson plays a pretty big role in it. There's some heartbreaking stuff about Dennis over here, and especially the descriptions, the stories about the early touring days of the Beach Boys are pretty fascinating over here. It's brutally honest. You got some stories about prostitutes, some crazy things, and if you think those days the Beach Boys were considered as the sort of clean cut, all over just these nice guys, but if you read the stories over here about them touring in 62, 63, around that time period, some crazy stuff with alcohol and prostitutes, and Dennis fighting some guys, and Mike's bare I think makes a introduction of, I don't know, whatever, like it's some weird stuff. It has a lot of cool pictures of David that you don't see anywhere else. I think these are from the 70s. He looks super cool over here. And whoop, what is that? Ha! Can you see that? I don't know why this was over here. Was I at this show? I don't know. I don't know which year this was. Whatever, you know. What? Anyway, even Jeff was scared this over there. Whatever, you know. I guess I've just kept those over here safe. I didn't know, but and there was actually a picture of me with Mike, Bruce, and David. Ha! How funny. Anyway, if you are one of those guys that have been dismissing David, his contributions, you know, blah blah blah, get the book, read it. You will find yourself enjoying it, fascinated by it, and after you have read it, you're gonna be googling for Moon album, this and that, you know, and David and the Marksmen. He did a lot of cool music after the Beach Boys as well, which is fairly just completely unknown, and you know, super fascinating stuff. And there's a cool story of, which is actually not that cool, but you know, funny anyhow, with David taking, I believe, LSD so much that he was tripping on the floor in some house in LA for like weeks or something like that. It's pretty horrible. But he actually became famous because he had some sort of suit, jacket, whatever, you know. So people came to see him because he sort of became this sort of sightseeing. That's the guy that took 20 LSD doses, whatever. I don't know. Weird stuff, crazy stuff. Let's move on. Over here, I have two books that I haven't read yet. Stephen Gaines' Heroes and Villains, and this is the book by David Leaf. This is the reissue that was released probably last year or 2 years ago, something like that. Originally from the 70s, and there's been multiple different editions of this one with different titles. Heroes and Villains is a controversial one. This is a very, highly praised one, considered one of the Beach Boys classic biographies with Catch a Wave. Not sure which one I'm gonna be reading next. I'm looking very much forward with this one, as well, because this is the gossip book. It's got some mid-page images of Rocky Pamplin, for example. I don't know why, but like this is the gossip book. It has a lot of crazy stories. Most likely not all of them are true, but it's one of those books that you don't want to read as your first introduction to the Beach Boys with, as is Wouldn't It Be Nice? But when you know the story, these are something that you might find interesting. This is a factual book. David Leaf, good friend of Brian, and has been writing about the Beach Boys for 50 years now, or something like that, and I'm super excited about this one because basically it includes the previous editions, but then there are new sections which then cover the decades also and the years up until the one, you know, when this was released. So that's cool. And yeah, there's some cool pictures as well in the middle part. There's a great picture with George Martin, Brian with George Martin and stuff. You know, so anyway, David, the great documentary with Beautiful Dreamer with Brian finishing Smile in the early 2000s, and you know, so I'm sure that I'm gonna enjoy this a lot. But anyway, that was it. What are your favorites? I would like to get the Philip Lambert book. I don't remember the title, but the one where because he's a great musical theorist, and I love his contributions in the Brian Wilson songwriter two-part documentary thing. So he wrote a book about Brian's music and Beach Boys music in a, you know, very theoretical way, because he's a very professionally educated musician. He really understands those arrangements and stuff and compositions. I would love to get that one, but it's super expensive, so I don't have it yet, at least. But is there something else that I should pick up? Let me know, you know, give me your recommendations. I would love to put them on my shopping list. Thanks for watching anyway. Take care. See you on the next one. Bye bye.